Hey guys, welcome to the DarshanTalks recording and podcast. On this podcast, we discuss life science, legal, and regulatory issues, especially in the context of medical affairs, clinical research, and promotional compliance. If you like these videos and podcasts, please like, leave a comment, and subscribe. You know you want to. This video and podcast is brought to you by the Kulkarni Law Firm. Reach out to the Kulkarni Law Firm for advice on PRC review, MRC review, developing SOPs, training, audit compliance, and more. Reach out to Darshan at kulkarnilawfirm.com or call me at 302-252-6959. Or you can just visit our website at DarshanTalks.com or visit the law firm website at kulkarnilawfirm.com. That's KULKARNI lawfirm.com. Hey guys, great to have you all here. I get to interview Pat Schaeffer. I'm so excited. We've had Pat on before. She was such a wealth of information because we were talking about silo busting networking, but we were really focusing on what that means internally and if that translates into better and more effective communications internally. What really stuck out to me is this idea of how do you use silo busting networking in engaging with potential clients and potential sales? So I wanted to invite Pat back. I get really, really excited when I get to talk to smart people. But so before we continue, Pat, could you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Darshan, and thanks for inviting me to come back. I'm Pat Schaeffer, obviously. I'm co-founder of a consulting firm called Talent Strategy Partners. And we work with leadership teams, executive teams, to identify and develop their leaders for the future. And part of that is, developing behavioral skills models. And that's really what networking is all about. So that's how silo busting networking grew out of that. It's a behavioral skills model for how leaders, managers, and individual contributors can the leaders create a culture of internal networking, and then everyone else works on building those networks. So that's kind of who I am.
So that's really interesting, right? You're talking, and you made this a very important point the last time we spoke, and I'll make sure I put a link to our last conversation on there. But you made this really clear that it's about a tone that's set by leadership. My question is, when you start translating that silo busting networking concept, and you go, it doesn't always have to be internal facing, it can also be external facing. Yeah. When you move that camera around, is it still leadership that guides that conversation, or is it something within you as a inherent networker?
I think it's an internal thing as an inherent networker. I'm a lifelong networker, and I suspect you are too. But it is this realization that you need other people to succeed, right? To get what you need. And it started for me early in my career when I was looking to move out of retail merchandising and get into human resources. And I just started talking to people and networking with people. And one of those people handed my resume off to somebody else who called me in for a courtesy interview, made a wonderful introduction for me within retail to somebody in the human resources side of retail. So that's how I made that transition. And that really drove home for me the importance of having this network. And I'm sure you've got stories like that too. And I'd love to hear kind of, how you got started at, what was that spark in your brain that said, wow, networking is really important?
So it's interesting you say that. Like for me, I've strongly believed, and this has been, I'm a sixth generation pharmacist, and my father owned a pharmaceutical company, his father owned a pharmaceutical company, and several people before that owned pharmacies because you didn't really have pharmaceutical companies in the same way at that point. And as we were doing this, what really struck out to me was that it doesn't matter what business it is, the entire lifeblood of your business is how much is marketing really. It's engaging with people. And yes, marketing and sales is critically important, But what you're discovering more and more is, and again, this was obvious to everyone except me as I was growing up, but it's not, it's really difficult to go mass market and go, I'm Coca-Cola, I'm whatever brand, buy my stuff. At the small business level, it really comes down to relationships. It's
Yeah.
those conversations, those communications, those moments you share in time that builds that next client, that next project. So networking was always something I had to do. I had to break out of my silo of the stuff I knew, which stuff I controlled, which is in this case, my law firm, for example, and bust into someone else's business and be like, I want to hear more about what you do. Let me see how 1 + 1 can be equal to 3. So you're already doing what you're doing. What can I do to add value so that you go from existing to flourishing? And that to me is the true sense of silo busting networking. It's not about, oh, I can create another relationship. It's creating a relationship to add value. And that second component is really difficult because it goes to an element you and I spoke about right before we got online, which was how do you, in general, keep that relationship going? It's not just about, oh, I have a relationship. How do you maintain that relationship? And I think you maintain relationships by adding value. But I'd love to hear your take on this.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, transactional networking doesn't really add value to anybody. It's where you get value, and it has to be mutually beneficial. So there's got to be value on both sides. But where you get that is maintaining that connection. That's part of what we talked about with silo busting networking, the curiosity, the connection, and the purpose. That connection piece is really important, and that takes effort, that takes work. You need to almost have a tickler file that says, I've made this connection with Darshan. There's definitely an opportunity to add value for both of us, to add value to what we do. I need to keep in touch with him. So I'm gonna touch base with him, whether it's an email or a phone call or a get together for coffee. I'm gonna make a note to do that every month and keep building that relationship, keep getting to know that person, allowing that person to get to know me. And that's where you get to that old, know, like, and trust. I know somebody because I've met them, I've had coffee with them, we've had some chats. Now I'm beginning to like them because I've been talking to them more and more. And the more I talk to them and the more I hear about how they work and what they've done and what they've accomplished, I begin to develop trust. And then with that trust comes my willingness to make referrals of clients, to introduce them to other people in my network that I think could result in a mutually beneficial relationship. So go ahead.
No,
Yeah.
that's really interesting to me because I want to explore that moment with you where you talk about this know, like, and trust concept, which again we've known about for like decades, but we're really starting to peel away at that more and more. The part that really throws me off is in the sales world, they say it takes, at least in my my component of sales, it takes about 13 points of contact before a person that you've just met becomes a actual point of sale. It becomes a sale. If that's true, it's really tough. It's really tough to have different reasons to connect with someone over the course of X period of time. I calculated out what that means. 13 points of contact would be, even if you did it at a weekly level, that lands up being over 3 months of weekly contacts. That sounds like a great thing to do, but at what point does that become harassment?
Yeah. That's really hard to do. So it really requires creativity, thinking about, well, that person well enough to understand what their interests are. And the kinds of things, you have a little sense of what their goals are, the kinds of things they're pursuing. So as you're going about your normal routine, keep them in the back of your mind. And as you read an article or you hear about something, you say, that would be of interest to Darshan. That's my point of contact this week. I'm just going to send him this article. And you're keeping your name in front of them. So not every contact needs to be an hour-long conversation or anything like that. It just needs to be, I learned about you. I know a bit about you now, and I'm going to connect with you on a regular basis and show you how much I've learned about you and how interested I am in you. You might just go back and ask a question, going back to curiosity, the skill of curiosity. That's just important when you're networking externally as it is when you're networking internally. So it could be, I read this article and it made me think of a question that I want to ask you. And that draws them out. That brings them in. So it doesn't have to be a long conversation. Just be something really quick that says, I've been thinking about you.
I love it because I've always thought of marketing and sales and networking to be about you showing how much value you bring. And what you're pointing out is the importance of vulnerability, which no one talks about. This idea that I don't know the answer. Can you be the expert and tell me more? And it's something I remember reading that, and I think I read that Ben Franklin used to do this, but apparently, allegedly, he would go when they wanted to start off a conversation. He would go up to the person that he wanted to ask a favor from and start by asking a favor like, "Can I borrow your pen?" Which is a semi-meaningless favor, but it sets up the conversation. It sets them up in a position of power. They don't feel like they owe you something. And that sets up a future engagement and a flourishing, blossoming friendship.
I love that.
It's
Borrowing a pen. Never thought about it.
I'd never considered it. But now, here's my question. You talk about silo busting networking, whether we're talking about internal or external. One of the things that really pops out to me is this idea of how people like you and me, for example, we love talking to people. On any given week, I'm probably talking to 4 or 5 people. And these are one of the reasons I do these podcasts is I get to talk to smart people like yourself, hopefully just connect and build these relationships. Certain volume, those are really hard to maintain. So how do you decide which relationships are worth continuously sort of nurturing? Which ones need to be nurtured less and which ones are time to let go?
Yeah, that's a hard thing to do. It really is. I tend to follow my gut. I don't know how you do it, but I follow my gut. I say there's something here, either on a personal level or a business level. It doesn't matter, but there's something there that compels me to get to know this person better and to maintain that relationship. I'll give you a great example. Networking, this was many years ago, going to a big event that our networking organization Beacon held. I met this woman named Barbara Taylor, and Barbara stood up in the meeting and she said, I'm looking for volunteers to, put together a program. And I thought, well, that sounds interesting to me. So it got to me, right? And just the way she put it out there, I thought, you know what? I think I could work with her. So I volunteered to help her with it. And that's led to a 10, 15-year relationship where we work together, we share contact information, we share all kinds of information that we think will help one another. We've got a couple of, in fact, silo busting networking is something that Barbara and I have put together as just a joint venture kind of thing. So there was something about Barbara that was very compelling to me. And we've become very good friends too. So there must have been something in my gut that said I could really get along with her. We'd be good friends. So it's just, or you might see something, you might say, oh, well, this person is exactly my target customer.
Yeah.
And I want to develop a relationship with them, understanding that relationship is not going to immediately result in business. And I don't want to come on like I'm trying to sell something to them, but I do want to establish that relationship so that I get an opportunity to let that person know what I'm capable of, what my expertise is, and then let the light bulb come on in their head that, oh, I could really use your services.
So, a couple of things come to mind. My first thing that sort of came to mind was this idea of is there when you're doing true silo busting networking, and we probably should come up with a I'm going to start calling it SBN from now on, just because
Yeah,
it's
that's
easier.
what we call it.
Oh, good. But when you are doing true SBN, is it about starting with the end in mind, which is I want to convert you to a sale? Or is it about going there with no purpose and going, let's see what develops? Or is there a third option that I haven't considered?
Well, the way I do it is the second way you described, which is I just start connecting with that person and having conversations, not with any particular intent in mind. Although what I've seen in a lot of the networkers that I talk to and network with is that they're very purposeful. So they do have an end result in mind. I don't necessarily do that. That's not my nature. But there are a lot of networkers who, really effective networkers who have a particular purpose in mind. And when they network, they are networking to meet that purpose. Now, it's not always a person that they're targeting, but they may say, I've got limited time to network. I could go to this event or that event. That event is where my audience is going to be. That's the event I'm going to go to. The other one might be more fun, but I want to do my purpose here is to see if I can meet people who might be my clients or who to meet people who might be my future employer if I happen to be somebody who's in career transition. I think it could go either way. A third option, I'm not really sure. Maybe some combination of those two.
Maybe some combination. Which is really interesting, right? So there's a subset of SBN that we haven't talked about, which is purposeful networking, and as opposed to what I would say I do, and what you're saying you do as well, which is sort of meandering through our networking with no real agenda. On one hand, it feels more authentic, but on the other hand, it feels meandering. And I can't tell if that's a good thing or not in my case. Sometimes like when someone comes to me and starts having a conversation, something starts clicking in my head, and I go, "What is it that you want from me?" So that I at least know if I can give it to you. And sometimes they're like, "No, I don't want anything from you." And about 20 minutes into the conversation, then they're like, "Oh, can you make an introduction to this person?" I'm going, "I don't actually know this person. I wish you'd have just told me." But I can't tell whether that is such what is better. And I know you said that you default to the same thing, which is non-purposeful networking. Do you find that you do that because it's authentic, or because you just don't have either the time or the energy to plan this stuff out as purposefully?
No, I think it's more just driven by my personality.
Okay.
I prefer being more spontaneous, and I don't have a lot of restrictions on my time. So I can, just decide to go to a networking event because my schedule's not restricting me. I think when you really need to be more purposeful about it is when you don't have a lot of time and you got to make every minute count. And I don't think there's anything inauthentic about that. I think it's just a matter of, I need to use my time wisely. So I'm going to target the kinds of networking that I do and the kinds of people that I network with. And I don't think there's anything wrong with either one. I think probably the best results come from being more purposeful. I make a lot of friends. I don't generate a lot of business through my networking. I've generated some, but that's not my sole purpose in networking. My purpose, my purpose in networking is just to get to know different people and have interesting conversations like the one we're having today.
Yeah, and that's sort of how we started this conversation, wasn't it? The first time, which
Yes.
was it was just a silo busting networking conversation where we said,
Yeah.
how do we, what are ways we might be able to engage together? And that's how this conversation started. and we kind of went to, well, I do a podcast, and maybe we should have this conversation.
Yeah,
And I think
yeah.
it's going to be really educational for people. What the other question that sort of pops up, it's more common than a question, is a personal rule I've set up, which is I don't want to join any organization that doesn't ask me to be active, that doesn't force me to be active.
Yeah.
And I feel like organizations in general tend to be hesitant about asking people to be active, because they tend to, in general, believe that there's so many people, they all have busy lives, they'll get what they want out of the group. In my case, what I came to do was engage with people. And we talked about Beacon, which you and I are part of. To me, it's incredibly important that I engage with the group, because that's how you will meet people. That's how you will add value. That's how you will, it gives you a reason to engage, as opposed to what is an almost artificial structuring of conversations. You're forced to work towards a common goal, and that common goal forces conversations, forces engagement, and builds the longer term friendships. Are you part of organizations that you have sort of edited out, that you kind of went, I'll see what the value of it is? Like I know, for example, I'll make this up, but let's say I was part of a national organization where you go, I'm going to have very limited impact on what they're doing, but I want to be part of it because it shows that I'm valuable or important or whatever it is. How do you decide which organizations you're going to be part of? And does SBN play a role in that for you?
Yeah, it most definitely does. For example, for a long time, I tended to belong to organizations that were human resource organizations, whether it was PSPS or SHRM or wherever it was. And then I realized, I'd really like to begin to get to know people who are not in my discipline. I want to know sales and marketing people. I want to know finance people. I want to know people of all different disciplines, operations people, because I just think it'll be more interesting, and it will help me, just be a better business person, just by having connections with people who have varied perspectives on things. I'm a big believer in diversity. I think the more diverse your network is, the better a thinker you are, because it really challenges you to think about things differently. So my choice of going with Beacon was just that. It was, that Beacon members come from all different disciplines, and they're all very accomplished people and very smart people. And then someone new comes along, a new name pops up like Darshan Kulkarni, and I say, and I look at your background and I say, wow, he's interesting. I'd really like to meet him. And so you make the connection, and then, as you say, we talked, and you said you had this podcast. Could we get together on your podcast? So, things just went from there. But it was just that you're somebody very different from me, and I'd like to talk to you and find out what makes you tick, right?
So we've talked a lot about people who are supposed to engage with each other. So we've talked about sales trying to engage with potential clients. We've talked about internal engagement where the company's saying, I want you all to interact. I want you all to engage. In the pharma world, one of the big problems, or one of the big, I don't want to call it a problem, situations is probably a better way to phrase this, is there are certain groups that see themselves as walled off compared to other groups. And maybe this is a conversation for another time, because we're really hitting the edge of this, and maybe this is just a tease. But maybe we want to have a conversation on this for the next time, which is, for example, compliance is generally expected to review what everyone else is doing. And does it make sense to silo bus network with the person who's reviewing what you're doing? Do you land up giving them too much of an insight in what you're doing? And therefore this amorphous border comes back to haunt you. Another example might be in the pharma world. There's something called medical affairs. There's a group called medical affairs, and a separate group called obviously sales and commercial. And there's a quote unquote Chinese wall between them. And the big question is, should those groups be engaging? And what's evident is that there are rules in place to avoid that Chinese wall being sort of crossed over. How and should you, and if so, how do you silo bust network in that conversation? Another example might be in the case of sales or medical affairs, when they want to bring their promotional pieces or the non-promotional pieces to market, they have to take their product and put it onto send it through what's called PRC, or medical legal regulatory review. I sit on those boards, and one of the things that they have to deal with is should that group be independent and providing independent verdict, or is it more of a collaborative effort? And how should that be handled? So I'm going to actually say, Pat, I think this is a tease for a third conversation. But do you want to give them a little tease of where that conversation could go?
Yeah, because certainly you don't want to cross boundaries that are going to violate the law or be unethical. But it just seems to me, and I'm not a pharmaceutical industry expert by any stretch of the imagination, but it seems to me that some conversations about how we can make one another's job easier might be worthwhile, or if I'm not in compliance, but I have, my thinking and my products have to go through this compliance process, shouldn't I know a little bit more about how that works?
Very cool. So before we go, Pat, a couple of things. How can people reach you?
So they can reach me very simply at info@tsphr.com. So that's TSP, Talent Strategy Partners, humanresources.com. Or they can just pick up the phone the old-fashioned way and call me at 215-275-7430.
I also want to add that you can actually go to an article that is going to be very, very, very illuminative if you find silo busting networking to be useful, which is if you just go to bit.ly/silo busting networking, you should be able to download that article as well. So any last words before we call it?
No, but I'm really intrigued by the topic that you've brought up about, is it bad to cross boundaries sometimes?
These conversations are not intended to be legal, regulatory, or clinical advice and may not be right for you. These conversations are intended for educational purposes only. Conversations on this forum do not create an attorney-client relationship.